You're listening to Owning the Buy Box, an IP Secure podcast. This is the podcast for agencies, brands, and aggregators who want to master Amazon, push out unauthorized competition, and take their business to the next level. You're about to hear a conversation that'll help you maximize your growth on Amazon by owning the Buy Box. Let's get into the show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Owning the Buy Box. I am your host, Dave Cooper, and today we're joined by someone who's definitely an expert on the space of brand protection and how it impacts agencies and sellers on Amazon, and that's Aman Advani. And Aman is the Director of Operations for AO2 Management. And AO2 is a very successful agency operating on Amazon as well as other platforms. They have Aman, correct me if I'm wrong, over, I think, 250,000 products for sale and, like 50 plus brands, right, that you're helping to support in the e-commerce ecosystem. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. My pleasure, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And as you probably know, this is a platform where we really try to get practical about talking about being successful on Amazon and the role that brand protection plays in that process. And I like to focus on really successful agencies because, you have your hands in all of it and you really have, I think, a unique perspective on the machinery that's required and the amount of effort that goes into that. Like, I think to sell a lot of products on Amazon and be really successful, you need to do a number of things well. And we think brand protection is one of those critical components. So we really appreciate you, being on. Maybe you could start out by just telling us, what's the importance of sort of channel control and brand protection, from your perspective, as someone living in the trenches?
Definitely. That's a great question, Dave. The main importance of brand protection is specifically to a channel like Amazon. It's so easy for anyone to just pick up something and start selling it. And being a bigger brand, oftentimes it can go unnoticed when either a small party or even sometimes a mid-sized party starts buying your product from a distributor, a reseller, a wholesaler, and then they're going and offering it under your listings on Amazon without your knowledge. What this does is not only does it sort of sometimes create buyer distrust. For example, if another brand or another company is shipping your product and they're not sticking to your standards, the package arrives damaged, it doesn't arrive on time. It affects badly on your brand, and customers don't necessarily know that they're buying from a reseller or they're buying from someone who's not you. So really the main importance of brand protection in my eyes is being able to prove to customers and to your audience that you are responsible for every part of the transaction, every part of the process. Without brand protection in that sense, it's very easy for customers to get a convoluted experience.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think there's absolutely a reputational risk, right? We've said it many times on this show. If someone goes to Amazon and buys your product, they're most likely completely unaware of the person that they've actually purchased it from. And so their experience could be great or it could be terrible. And then the likelihood they go back to Amazon and buy your product is very slim. So I agree. I think agencies in particular, their success as organizations is very much tied to the success of their clients, right? If your clients are...
Definitely.
Please go ahead, elaborate on that.
Yeah, sorry to cut in. No, I was just going to say we rely on the success of our clients, especially where AO2, the way we just structure our services and our agreements, like we're very vested in our clients. We only sign with sellers who we believe in. So we don't tend to go for products, that are cheaply made, things we think can be easily replicated. But at the same time, so many of our sellers are so big in their space that really facing that first problem I mentioned, the distributor problem, that comes up the most often, I'd say, for me, just because it's so easy for us to see the Amazon picture, right? Like we know what we're looking at when we look at a buy box. We know Amazon IP protection and brand protection importance. And sometimes to a bigger company that's just entered Amazon, or they don't view Amazon as their main or most important sales channel, for them, finding out where those resellers are and how to remove them is a huge struggle a lot of the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see it over and over again that the topic that gets the most attention is counterfeits, right? There are, massive amounts of money and resources and organizations and legal teams focused on counterfeits. And I get it. That's important. Counterfeits are not only a flat out, complete, utter revenue loss, but there's consumer risk. So I believe in that strongly. And most companies will probably prioritize counterfeiting. But the problem is, gray market is so much bigger than counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is this big, gray market is this big. And I think, to your point, a lot of companies don't want to deal with it. They know it's there, but dealing with it means enforcing your contracts, corralling your dealers and maybe even changing all your contracts, right? And having to go through that process. So they just see a ton of work. And I think for agencies and sort of providers of services like yourself, you're on the front lines of that, right? You get a new customer, and the first thing I would think you're probably thinking about, or part of it is, we got to clean up the channel if we're going to help you grow. And I hear it all the time. And so I think it's hard because brands don't want to face the gray market problem. And at the end of the day, they say, well, we've been paid for the product, right? Because it's a dealer. So it's not like it's a counterfeit or a total loss. But they don't understand the consequences of an unrestricted channel on Amazon to your inability to control margins and price, your ability to launch marketing successfully. You can't market to a product listing on Amazon if you don't have the buy box.
Correct. And that is the main caveat, I would say. Owning the buy box is just probably the most important thing on Amazon, regardless of your product, regardless of your category. I would say having that 100% buy box is the number one. And we see it so many times when really our customers, our clients won't understand that even a small dip in one day, like going down 5 to 10% of the buy box just for a day, can affect sales in the thousands. And that's why it's so important for us to be partnering with, industry cutting edge tools, services that really go above and beyond to provide an in-depth analysis of where we're losing against these resellers, how we can target them, how we can get them removed, and creating that like full funnel process of, identifying and then dealing with all of the reseller issues.
Yeah. And I think another difficulty, right, for you and for other companies in your space, you're not the IP owner, right? So to add more complexity, you have a vested interest in cleaning up that buy box, and so does your client. And there's a number of ways to achieve that, right? And again, going back to that like difference between counterfeiting and gray marketing and the way that these problems manifest themselves on Amazon, as an agency, you need the ability to kind of use all those tools to clean up the channel, right? And so that means the client needs to be part of that conversation, especially if we're going to go and enforce, right, their IP, for them or with them.
Definitely. And when terms like that come up, enforce, IP, protection, brand, it really paints a different picture in a client's mind or in a seller's mind. Mm-hmm. What's so cool, specifically, I guess, about the Amazon channel is while there are definitely legal repercussions and implications you have to be aware of when taking action, I do believe that the system has been set up to make it very clean cut and easy for, verified sellers to actually be able to take some of an action against resellers. Even if we're not immediately always successful, there is a clear path. And I think that's really one of the most important parts of the whole brand registry process on Amazon.
Yeah. I mean, part of why we started the show is because we think brand protection is really a business issue. It's not something that should live in a legal department with a couple people, right? And along with your trademarks. I mean, there is a legal component to brand protection. There's no question. But when you think about it more broadly, it's a business issue. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. And I completely agree. Definitely. You don't need a law degree to, submit an IP complaint through brand registry.
And it's really all about finding out what the pain point is, for the client or for the seller. For some, they might not want to do any brand protection until you show them the exact amount of revenue they're losing by not taking off these resellers.
Yeah.
And for
do
some,
you find
it might
that is common?
Yeah, that is very common. And the other big sell for me is usually the brand reputation, like that's where I tend to get a lot of people who are tied to their brand, who have been with their brand for a long time, who want to see it grow, is telling them like, hey, like, I understand you're fine with like, losing X amount of money, but like you're letting someone else like steal your customers. Second of all, display a voice for your brand that's not yours. So getting them to people who identify, either with finance or either with their brand, it's very easy to target and say like, hey, brand protection is so important because of X, Y, Z. And I know you're concerned about this. That's really where I try to go. Like, I guess I would say for the sell. That being said, I know overall brand protection is so important that like, regardless of however I can get my client to pursue action, I need to, because it's going to be overall better for their business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Because again, you're making it a business discussion. It's not, something else. And the reality is one way or the other, you want to sell more, they want to sell more, and numbers don't lie. I mean, let's just to go in a different direction, which is, I think, if you met someone at a party who just started their own consumer brand and they're like, dude, I'm blowing up on Amazon. Like I launched 3 months ago. People love my product. What would be some of the things that, you would advise them? Hey, make sure you do this, man, because this is going to help you long term, as it relates to brand protection, of course.
Definitely. First POA would be putting together a plan and a scope for how you're going to protect your brand long term, especially depending on the category of the product. We're seeing, you talked about gray space, you talked about counterfeit. Even with the counterfeit space, we see so many manufacturers out of China are able to replicate and then outsell companies from America because they have cheaper cost of manufacturing and really a well built out engine to just rapid fire these e-commerce businesses on Amazon. Yep. And so when you're starting out, especially in America as a smaller seller where the fees are higher, you have to deal with, inventory issues, fulfillment issues during Amazon peak seasons. Brand protection is so important because the second you let someone gain control of your brand or gain control of the buy box, that issue never stops. It's just a constant buy box issue after buy box issue after buy box issue. So getting ahead of it and coming up with a POA and dedicating a budget to either a service, a department, or a person to monitor that buy box is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. You nailed it, right? Be committed to controlling your channel, because you could have the best agency in the world with the smartest people. But if you're not willing to defend the buy box, then again, a lot of those strategies they're going to use to make you successful won't work. They just don't work.
Exactly.
So yeah, I completely agree with, with what you're saying. Are there any sort of things that you guys do at AO2? I mean, how important is brand protection relative, you think, to AO2 management as a business?
Definitely.
And so, for instance, do you guys have folks thinking about this a lot on your end? I'm just curious what your approach is to it.
Definitely. We have process partners, first of all, with IP Secure, who help us out with this, which is an incredible tool, an incredible dashboard. The amount of data you can get from IP Secure and like-minded services is really, really incredible. Even being, director of operations at an agency, I personally didn't want to build this out in-house because the previous system we had was a team of, either remote or in-house specialists kind of just checking one by one all the buy box for every listing.
Sure.
And it's incredibly inefficient. And that works really when you're working with smaller sellers, maybe single SKU businesses, 5 SKU businesses. As we started to grow, we realized we needed help on the buyer protection front, which is why we enlisted the help of IP Secure and other services. And really having that, I always like to call it just like an algorithm presence or computer presence where I don't have to think about it. I know it's algorithms working in the background.
Right.
Yeah, it's such a peace of mind. And the amount of data we're able to get week over week, month over month that we can collect and then display to our clients to say, hey, you remember that buy box service I had you sign up for that we launched a few months ago? Look at the results from it and look at how much money we've been saving over the past 3, 4, 5 months.
Because it's really about the data, right? It's about sort of being able to tell the story to your client 100%. So that you're both on the same page and both equally motivated. Mm-hmm. And like you said earlier, data motivates, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about it in theory and you just go in and you say, hey, look, we have to pull back on marketing because we're not winning the buy box. That's not as interesting as as walking in with a report or a piece of data and says, no,
that might work with the mom and pops, you know what I mean? But with the bigger companies, for sure, you need to be data first and you need to have data visualizations to show them that your, inferences make sense.
Yep. Yep. So I guess what you're saying is like you guys started out by really throwing resources at it, right?
Yeah,
People,
definitely.
and that makes sense because you are to a high degree in a services business, right?
Correct.
An expertise business. So that does make sense. But what you're saying is like as the agency scaled, that approach did not scale along with us.
Correct.
Yeah.
The cost efficiency would have been totally off, and even aside from that, like the time efficiency. Having a well built out program or app is always, in my opinion, better than having someone doing a manual task check.
You already know your success relies on your Amazon sales growth, and that means beating counterfeiters and illicit sellers to the buy box. But do you have all the tools you need to do so effectively? IP Secure offers seller intelligence to understand and root out unauthorized sellers and push them out of the buy box through simple enforcement actions that actually work, meaning customers will only see your legitimate products and shop from your authorized sellers. Learn how at ipsecure.com.
How important is Amazon? Because I know you guys do other platforms too, but do most of the customers or the clients that you guys have, is Amazon really like the number one driver of revenue for them?
Even if it's not the number one driver of revenue, that's usually the main place they're concerned about resellers or losing that buy box. For example, those number one category sellers, they've got a repeat purchase rate that's very high. They have their own Shopify or other website where they have an email marketing list, so they're able to effectively target those customers. So they're not too worried about losing that loyal customer coming to their website. But on Amazon, being that it's such a well built out marketplace and really such an immersive shopping experience, I find that this is where, first of all, it's hardest to convince people that they need buyer protection, how important the buy box is. But second of all, this is also the area where I see the most resellers and buy box thieves. So it's really funny.
Yeah.
And it goes back to my point of like data. Really, data is key and data is the king when making determinations on how to best approach protecting that buy box.
Yeah, I think Amazon is so good at what they do and create such a frictionless buying experience for the consumer that who the seller is almost is irrelevant.
Exactly.
Right, in that journey. So that creates a lot of risk for organizations who make a living, being a seller. So when you really can't have a lot of your own identity, it's hard.
Exactly.
And that's why we tend to focus on Amazon on the show, because it's half of every dollar spent in North America on the internet, right? So I think, and I tell this to brands all the time, as resistant as you may feel about really digging into some of these issues, if you don't do it anywhere, do it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Because I actually read somewhere this morning, I think 63%, of all sort of product related searches begin on Amazon.
Wow.
Right. So even if you're not going to buy there, because I do know people who were like, I'm not going to buy on Amazon. I don't, I like to go to yeah. But you're going there to see what the price is, because they're going to have the best price, right? Their entire system is dependent on having the best price. So I think that's interesting. Did you hear about the news last week, with the sort of new performance dashboards that Amazon released and some of the detail around that?
I did, but I'd love if you can give me a more in-depth explanation.
Well, look, I'm not a seller on Amazon, so I don't really understand, obviously, everything that they're releasing, but the larger announcement was about, these seller performance dashboards, but also in there was some, and I can share the language with you too as well. I can send you a link to it in Seller Central, but buried in the T's and C's was a comment about, and I'm paraphrasing right now, but in essence, as they're moving to this new health rating approach for sellers, right? Points being added and deducted based on behavior. They also said, and if there could be a ceiling to the number of, let's say, complaints, IP or otherwise, that a seller can receive before we deactivate it. And then it sort of alluded to that ceiling being 5.
Wow.
which is the first time I've ever read, heard, or seen anything from them definitive really about how many, complaints does it take to get Johnny completely removed from the platform.
Totally.
So I thought that was really interesting. And
it is. And to touch on that a little bit, it's funny because here at AO2, our team of experts has been having really that same sense for a long time, that Amazon ranks sellers based on certain metrics, and everyone's got an amount of percentage points that puts them on the scale, right? You're either an A seller or you're a D seller, an F seller, and they're ready to boot you. And so we've seen with repeated violations, it is especially hard, and more so as we progress, day by day. It's extremely, extremely hard to get past a reported violation that gets proved accurate. And on the inverse, it's getting harder and harder to make a fully accurate claim on Amazon against a reseller.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think they're getting a little fed up. I feel like their approach may be, look, while they don't want to, I think, do significant things that really impact the majority of sellers, I think they want to do things that impact the minority of like the more hardcore unauthorized group.
Definitely.
And it does kind of feel that way. It
feels that way, and also like they're saving their own time and money by limiting the amount of support cases that'll come in through all of this. The reselling. I mean,
they're to their own admission, spending hundreds of millions a year, right, dealing with counterfeits and gray market and a gazillion different programs.
Yeah, and adding on to that point, Dave, I don't know if you heard, Amazon is like working to automate their support as well. So along with all of the new programs, betas, automations that are coming out, including the new dashboards, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see, a reduction in actual human support, as I like to call it.
Which doesn't like really make me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk to a human sometimes.
And that's like just to keep like hitting the nail on the head. It's so important now, especially if you're launching or if you're, starting to grow. Getting all of your ducks in a row. I know we're referencing brand protection very heavily, but like getting your buy box in a row now is going to be so important because in a few months, the system for support is going to be completely changed, and it's going to be a lot harder to get case logs pushed through on Amazon.
Oh, wow. So you really feel like this is major because it's going to impact your ability to just, deal with escalations or, look, protecting, your customer's sales channel is complicated, right? And sometimes involves back and forth and counterclaims or accusations and things. I mean, it's not like flicking a light switch, I guess is my point in most cases. So what you're saying is you think that's just going to get harder.
Yes, because I don't think Amazon's going to be there as much as they have been recently as an officiating body. I think they're going to kind of let sellers hash it out, and then they're going to keep a very strict set of guidelines. And as long as complaints are submitted within those guidelines, they will be accepted. And if they're not going to be. So getting the details of complaints right, and also just really getting ahead of your buy box now is what I highly suggest.
Yeah. Part of it too could be, getting out in front of the heat, the regulatory antitrust heat, that they've been under. I think it only helps them to be as proactive as possible to get rid of, again, that like really tip of the iceberg, worst of the worst.
Exactly.
I also heard a rumor that they were kind of going after drop shippers.
Yes, I heard that as well.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I think that's an area where there are a lot of reputable, legitimate, logistics and fulfillment companies. And then there's not. And like any area, right? You have good guys and bad guys and a bunch of people in the middle. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, what they do there because, it is a viable service that a lot of people use. So I don't really understand yet how it's policeable, if you will. I know.
And especially as remote fulfillment and the international markets start to grow, I feel like there's going to have to be some sort of cohesive brand protection, either service or offering from Amazon themselves, or a certain stringent rules that applies across those marketplaces. Because right now what happens is, you can have your U.S. trademark, you can have your U.S. patent, but someone could technically copy your exact product. And if you don't have the patent or trademark in, let's say Japan, it'd be very easy for them to resell there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I work with lots of brands over the years who don't own their trademark in China, as we all know, right? Because of this, basically they'd lost it to third parties.
Mm-hmm.
And in that system, it's common. And you've got to spend a lot of money to go fix that issue. And it all starts with those IP rights.
Correct.
So I completely agree. And there's a lot of programs, but I will give Amazon a ton of credit. I mean, I think they're doing way more than any other platform to try to deal with this issue. And I think it's hard to argue with that. And we're big advocates here for people being, brand registry members or the transparency program.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when you guys work with a lot of clients that they're already using tools like that, or you're like, they're not, and you kind of point them in that direction?
Definitely. We've pointed tons of people toward transparency, toward, I believe it's called like Amazon Project Zero. For the most part, we try to really only work with brand registered brands, people who are already ahead of their trademark, ahead of their rights, because we don't like dealing with those issues as much as they do. So exactly right. So we try to go after sellers who already have their brand registered. That being said, we deal with a lot of like new to market, new to brand companies as well. So enforcing that from the get go with them and letting them know, hey, like as we start working together, we need you to do your due diligence and get your trademark done and get your brand registry done. So definitely pointing them in the right direction to get set up for success. And then those who are already set up are usually who we tend to work with. I found the amount of time I've spent, going back to convincing a client that it's even important to own the buy box or have 100% buy box. That was an initial conversation that was very hard for me to get across to a lot of sellers. Unfortunately, now circumstances have changed. Most of our sellers do have brand registry, and those that don't are understanding.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's part of the overall value, right, that AO2 provides is advice. It's not only about sort of selling your client something, it's about giving them the overall experience. A big part of that is like, hey, here are the steps to protecting the channel. Especially when you are in a relationship together, right? You're both in the same foxhole, as we talked about. And I think for a lot of agencies too, there's even exclusivity issues involved.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I think you and a brand decide to work together on an exclusive basis. That means they want your best.
Yes.
Well, I think it's okay as an agency to say, well, we kind of expect you to help us, right? And that means be part of brand protection, be part of some of these kind of critical initiatives, so that we can all achieve our goals together. And I think when you explain it that way, it makes a lot of sense. I think an agency that walks in and says, we can just take care of it all for you is, just not being honest, because that's not how it works. Right?
I always
you
like
can't
to
do
use
it by yourself.
No, totally. You're so right, Dave. I always like to use the analogy of like, I consider AO2 the engine for a car, right? And we're here to help you move, but like we only move if you're pressing the pedal and you're steering the car.
Right.
So you got to press and you got to steer, and that's all we ask. But like, yeah, we do definitely need help from the seller and client side.
Yep. Last question, Aman, and then I'll let you go. I really appreciate the time that you've kind of spent with us. I know you guys are super busy over there. And I'm going to kind of ask the question maybe in two different ways. I mean, the first way would be an agency. If I came to you as a buddy and I said, look, I'm going to start my own agency. What would some of the advice points that you have for me be, you think?
Definitely. Know your audience, know who you're targeting. First of all, know like the type of clients you're going to be able to bring on and successfully manage with a small team.
Yep.
And then really, if you are starting with that small team, really picking, I always like to say, right person, right seat, getting people in departments and roles where they're going to thrive. And number three, determining, from the start up, what is the most important. And per everything we've been talking about, logistics, inventory, and brand protection is such a huge part of Amazon specifically that having a role designated specifically for brand protection is definitely not a waste from the get-go.
Yep.
You definitely want that role or that position to be multifaceted if you can. I always recommend when starting up with a smaller group of people, I always like everyone to be multifaceted, because then you're not confined to one lane. You have a few people who can kind of hover over different areas and take care of different initiatives. But I highly recommend logistics and shipping, and then brand protection as one segment. Another segment being advertising.
Yep.
A segment for creative, and then a segment for administration and finance. Those four are so important to any specifically e-commerce agency. you need to have those 4 areas dialed in or you won't be able to grow successfully.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that there's no sort of secret sauce, right? There are a number of functions. That's why I'm always fascinated by e-commerce, because people think it's like you slap a picture on Amazon and, you're done. It doesn't work that way. I mean, there are just so many different levers that you need to pull, and experience matters is kind of the underarching theme of what you're saying, is get good people, right? Who are going to dig into it all.
Yeah. And aside from like even like extensive experience, I think people would think outside the box. Yep. To be fairly honest, I haven't been in e-commerce very long, yep. Only a couple of years, but I think because of my eagerness to learn, how fast I've been able to pick up certain skills, soft and hard, I've really just like thrown myself into it, and I've understood a lot about what it takes to successfully run an agency and the group of people that you need for it.
Yep. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So Aman, if I'm, let's assume I'm a brand out there and I'm looking for an agency to help me. What's the best way for them to potentially get in touch with you or with someone else at AO2?
Always feel free to check out our website, AO2marketing.com, soon to be AO2management.com. We're actually revamping. Another best way, my recommendation for finding professional help, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource that I feel like a lot of people underutilize, especially as brands or clients. When looking for an agency, it's easy to go to a website and get upsold on a package or a service that you don't necessarily need. Versus on LinkedIn, I feel like I've had so many conversations with sellers, other agencies, about just, hey, generally like, hey, man, like I've seen your profile, seen your resume. I have this brand. Like, what do you recommend? Take a look at my website. And I'm always happy to help. You know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to say no to offering a couple quick tips. I highly recommend using that network of people in the space from LinkedIn, using the rest of your Amazon network, going to those trade shows, going to those conferences. I think the biggest thing I ever did that really just threw me into e-commerce was going to the Prosper conference in Vegas last year, or actually, sorry, this year, the start of this year.
Oh, really?
I believe it was in March or April. And I just got to learn about so much in the e-commerce space I wasn't aware of. IP protection services and firms being one of them. Yep. And I believe that's actually what led me out on my search to get it to be less of a manpower task and more of a software task that we could run in the back end. And you just learn so much about the different new services, new features out there, both from Amazon and from the agency side, that can help brands grow, especially in e-commerce, a area that's continuing to improve and change day over day. It's really important to be on the forefront of everything new that's coming out, because you could be missing out on something that'll totally 10x your business and you have no idea.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I recommend the Prosper event as well. I think it's a great place to kind of find new services, agencies, tools, resources. And thanks for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Dave, thanks so much for having me.
Again, if anyone wants to reach Aman, he's on LinkedIn. I would just search for Aman Advani or AO2 Management, or go to their website at AO2marketing.com. I'm Dave Cooper. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.
You've been listening to Owning the Buy Box, a show from IP Secure. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. Please give us a rating, leave a comment, and share episodes that you love. That helps us keep delivering you the tools you need to sharpen your competitive edge and ensure your authorized sellers always own the buy box. We'll see you next time.